My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens, Video 20, Dickens Explains Part 3. So here is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. The diagram on the front shows John in the writing room of Charles Dickens. Dickens is surrounded by his characters. Now in Chapter 2, these characters are the pre-Christmas Carol characters of Dickens, Oliver Twist and Mr. Pumblechook and so on. By Chapter 9, which I'll mention in a minute, it's a different grouping. Now, writer John Passfield leaves his home, buys a coffee, and drives down to the shores of Lake Erie to perform a Christmas ritual, strolling along the beach at Port Maitland. It's something he's done for many years, but this year is different. This year, John suddenly finds himself in the writing room of famed Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who sets out his new idea for a Christmas tale. Dickens invites John to watch rehearsals for the writing of this story. But as Dickens struggles through contentious negotiations with his amazingly independent characters, John wonders whether A Christmas Carol will ever be written. Now, Charles Dickens is a very compassionate person. At this stage of the novella, in Chapter 9, he has already told John of his fate as a potential character in a future Dickens novel. I'll read that section in a moment. However, instead of ending the scene, if it is Dickens who has control of the situation, Dickens adds what seems to be an explanation as to what's happened in the relationship between he, Charles Dickens, and John. It all seems to be explainable in terms of a relationship between two other Dickens characters, Tiny Tim and Little Nell. Let's have a look and see if we can figure out what Dickens is explaining in the language of imagery to John. Okay, so before I start reading, I'm going to hold the diagram up again. So in Chapter 2, John finds himself in the writing room of Charles Dickens. Dickens is surrounded by the pre-Christmas Carol characters. Turns out that they are not cooperating with Dickens. They don't want to let him write what will become A Christmas Carol. Now in Chapter 9, John appears in the same writing room. There's Dickens again, seated on a chair, this time surrounded by not only the pre-Christmas Carol characters, but the Christmas Carol characters. They're all intermingled. So something has happened. Something has broken the logjam, and the Christmas Carol characters have agreed to let Dickens write their story, which we know will become the novella A Christmas Carol. Okay, let's go to Chapter 9, page 9192, and see if we can figure out what went on there. Okay, so this is Dickens speaking. Now I had told them, John, that is told the characters, I told them, John, of my plans for a mystery novel, one whose main character, John, would have been you. I told them that I had been very, very cautious, very wary where you were concerned, that I had been extremely discreet, John, but they insisted that I should take further precautions just the same. They were not afraid of you, John. They were actually afraid of me. They feared that I would write a tale that would blow the lid off my life, break the chain that seals the cabinet, the vault, the monument of my most secret, most private concerns. They thought as a body, John, as a unit of one, as a community of characters, John, that such a literary project, a voyage to uncharted lands, if I were allowed to carry on, if you and I were allowed to proceed, John, would have sailed too close to the rocks along the coastline of my life. The characters felt, to put it bluntly, that I had made an egregious error in creating you. So that's Dickens telling John that there will not be a Canadian novel which will not have John as a major character. Simply that's the fact. Okay, now, Dickens could stop there, but he goes on to explain. So let's go to page 92. Here we are. Yeah, same page, actually. I have always been super sensitive, John. It's a painful thing to be. One is always taking precautions without knowing whether they're needed. One wonders at all. Okay, and he could stop there, Dickens, as he talks to John. But he goes on. So let's go over to page 94, 95 and see what else Dickens wants John to know. You know, John, a person asked me a question. A person with a sentimental bent, to be sure. How, this person asked, how, after creating her and living with her, loving her as I love my family, as I love my friends. I try so hard, John, to love my multiple restless selves. How could I love this girl, he asked me, as I was telling him that I, as a novelist, was extremely prone to do. How, he asked, did I have the nerve, the fortitude, the lack of kindness, the iron resolve, the dark necessity, I would say, to what? To terminate, to end, to put period to my character, Little Nell. Well, John, it was hard to explain to this person. In fact, I didn't venture to try. I simply thought to myself, as he assumed, I am sure, that I was ignoring his question, or that I hadn't heard it, perhaps. But I thought to myself that a character, John, is created out of necessity. And out of necessity, then, in turn, an author is compelled sometimes to cause a character, as was the case on that occasion, to cease, to desist, to depart, John. In short, frankly, to die. Necessity, John, necessity for life and also for death. Necessity in all we say and all we do. So sometimes it's a trade-off, John. The death of Little Nell, the life of Tiny Tim. You can't save all your characters, though you might go to great lengths to try. Sometimes you wonder if you'll be able to save yourself. Well, that's Dickens's explanation. Read it carefully and think about it. Ask yourself, what exactly is he saying to John? Okay, now, you might wonder about my interpretation, since I'm the author of that speech and of that novella, but here's something about literature that's related to that passage and to this novella, and explains really why I'm not going to explain it in this video presentation. I've enjoyed reading books over many, many years. I've also enjoyed reading criticism about those books. Probably the first time I actively sought out criticism about a book was when I was in grade 13, which was the 5th year of high school in Ontario, Canada at that time. And the teacher had assigned we students to each write an essay about the play Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I was 18 years old that year, but I still had the idea that the teacher had some kind of secret way to find out the meaning of a work of literature, and that I didn't. I had no idea what the play Hamlet meant, and so I got in my car and I drove uptown to the public library and searched for a book that would tell me the meaning of Hamlet. When I got to university, I discovered that there was a vast library, not only of books, but of books about books. So along with my enjoyment of books that were fiction, I acquired an enjoyment of books that were about books of fiction, in particular biographies of writers and criticism about their works. However, over the years, I've come to realize that I have a fundamental disagreement with what I assume is the assumption that all critics make. I have come to believe that critics of literature assume that they are in the role of a cultural leader, a person whose role it is to interpret a book of words to the people of the society. So it seems to me that each critic seems to feel that he or she is interpreting a work of literary art as meaning something with which everyone in society should agree. I don't feel this way at all. I never read a critic of a work of literary art with the idea that I want the critic to tell me what the book means. What I want the critic to do is to provide his or her own personal interpretation as an invitation to me to develop my own personal interpretation. I see literary criticism as a springboard, which works as does a springboard at a swimming pool. One leaves the springboard behind when one dives into the water. You don't take the springboard with you. You leave it behind. It helps you to get to another place. The springboard would be the words of the literary critic, and the water would be one's own interpretation. I believe that if one is an original thinker, which I flatter myself that I am, one will not read many words of another person's opinions without going off on tangents of one's own. These tangents of one's own are due to the fact that the life experience of the critic has generated imagery which is mingling, mixing, and interlayering with the imagery of the work of literary art to produce potential meaning in the mind of the critic. It stands to reason, then, that the life experience of the reader, a different person, not only of the original work of literary art, but of the criticism. So the reader reads the work of art, reads the criticism, but the reader's a different person. So in that person's mind is mixing, mingling, interlayering all the imagery of the literary work of art and the words of the critic to produce potential meaning that is uniquely relevant to that reader. If you read a novel, if you read a piece of criticism, it's going to be unique in its meaning inside your mind. It won't be the same as anybody else's meaning. I enjoy reading criticism. I thank the critics who provide it, but I never feel that they're giving me the author's interpretation or society's interpretation of a work of literary art. We leave the author behind, we leave the critic behind, and we leave the work of literary art behind, as we leave behind the diving board when we enter the swimming pool. So that's why I'm not going to explain what Dickens is explaining to John. Okay? Once again, this is my novella, Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, a novella by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon, where you can see more information. It's found on my publisher's website, Rocks Mills Press, ROCKSMILLSPRESS.com, and on my website, johnpassfield.ca. There are 2 free books. I wrote a planning notebook while I was planning and writing the novella. I wrote a journal of response to the novella as I was polishing the rough draft. They're both there. They're both free. You just click on the icon and they appear on your screen. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.